What's going on, everyone? Bank Rob here, and we've got a lot to talk about today. There's been a lot happening over the past couple weeks. Well, there's been a lot happening this year in general, but even so, there's been a lot in the news over the past week. And for those of you eagerly wondering, yes, we will be talking about banks a little bit. But of course, be sure to hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm and be sure to subscribe for more content like this. Now, let's get right into the news. So, right off the bat, on Friday, the United States reported almost 200,000 new virus cases in one day. That is a crazy high amount compared to back in March and April. We were not even close back then, but now we're at 200,000. I knew that the autumn uptick was going to happen, but not like this. And to illustrate how serious this is, New York City has decided to close their public schools. This decision was made when the positivity rate in New York City reached about 3% over the course of 7 days. Mayor de Blasio did say that the school closures would only be temporary. They might be reopened next month or maybe later. That's to be determined. Now, why that's a little bit reassuring, I suppose, let's not forget that Governor Cuomo announced just about a week and a half ago that there would be a 10 p.m. curfew for restaurants and bars. He and de Blasio also mentioned that in the near future there would be further restrictions to public life. So this is not looking very good, at least not at this very moment. But there is some good news on the horizon. Now, I just wanted to show the charts from Wednesday real quick because I was briefly watching Cuomo's news conference, and I think that was like around 1 p.m., 1:30. It was like somewhere between 1 and 2. And during that announcement, the market just started selling off and then really started coming down at the end of the day. And you could see like major sell-off like right here. And it went down from 361 all the way down to 356 for the day. Now, funny enough, around the same time, well, a little bit after, this was actually around 2:20 p.m., Zoom was trading around 394, and it hasn't been that low in months. And then it had quite a bit of a run-up in like the course of, 10, 15 minutes, all the way up to 415. Yeah, so that's like a $20 move right there, and that was pretty significant. And why that happened, at least why I think that happened, is because of all the news surrounding the uptick in virus cases, as well as the New York City school closures. And this means that people will not be returning to the office physically anytime soon. And while this is terrible news generally with this exponential increase in virus cases, this is great news for Zoom. The longer that people have to work from home and have to use their product to connect and to collaborate, the more money they're going to make. So this is great news for that. And for some other not so great news, jobless claims in the United States have increased for the first time in 5 weeks. And this is from the week ending November 14th. Jobless claims were up 31,000 from the prior week. They were at about 709,000 for that week. Now, these are initial jobless claims. There's also the continuing claims, which actually decreased by 429,000 to, well, about 6.4 million for the week ended November 7th. So as we can see, even though the unemployment rate is down to about 6.9%, the labor market is still suffering. But have no fear, Steve Mnuchin is here. Well, hopefully. So this was pretty big news last week. Mnuchin notified the Federal Reserve that they must return about $580 billion that has not been spent, but that was allocated for lending programs that the Federal Reserve created near the beginning of the pandemic, so back in March. Now, of course, with the return of these funds, this basically means that these programs are ending, and Mnuchin has set an expiration date of December 31st for these programs, and these programs include the primary and secondary market corporate credit facility, which is basically a lending program where the Federal Reserve buys corporate bonds, as well as the municipal liquidity facility, which is similar, only the Fed instead buys bonds from state and local governments, as well as the Main Street lending program, which I'm sure you heard before, and the term asset-backed securities loan facility. But these are not all the programs that the Federal Reserve has. There's also the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as the Money Market Mutual Fund Liquidity Facility, as well as 2 others. Now, these programs don't expire on December 31st. Mnuchin has actually requested a time period of 90 days. So for all you businesses that still need your employees' paychecks covered, the Paycheck Protection Program is still here. And the hope is to use this $580 billion for stimulus. And the Federal Reserve was opposed to this decision, and the reason for that was even though the funds were not spent, it is still better to have these funds available for those lending programs in case there are any other businesses that may need it. But Mnuchin's response to that was businesses don't need more debt, they need grants. And that's why he would prefer to use these funds for stimulus. And that is a good point. But of course, Mnuchin and McConnell have a battle ahead of them because the Democrats were not fond of this. Nancy Pelosi even accused Mnuchin of trying to hinder the goals of the upcoming Biden administration. And aside from the criticism, there's currently no indication that the Democrats are willing to come down from $2.4 trillion. And they're certainly not interested in discussing the $500 billion measure that McConnell has been proposing for the last several months. So I guess we'll see how that goes. Now it's time for the good news. Last week, Pfizer and Moderna each announced trials have shown that their respective vaccines are 95% effective. Now this is fantastic news because the FDA specified that the vaccines only need to be 50% effective. For the sake of full transparency, it does say here that the companies announced their findings via news releases and not via peer-reviewed scientific journals. So outside experts can't evaluate their claims. So currently, these results can't be considered conclusive, and these figures may change as time goes on as the trials continue. Now, for those of you wondering, when Pfizer initially announced their trial results for their vaccine's efficacy, which was on November 9th, their stock did trade up a significant amount from $37 to $42 and then had a big sell-off once the market opened. And since then, it's been steady at around $36, $37. This stock generally doesn't move a lot. So for this run-up from 37 to 42, that's pretty big for Pfizer. And for Moderna, when they've announced their vaccine numbers, they had quite a bit of a run-up from 93 all the way up to 105 during pre-market, but again, they had a big sell-off once the market opened, all the way back down to around 94. But that doesn't stop the FDA from taking a gander. On Friday, Pfizer submitted their vaccine to the FDA for emergency use authorization, and over the next few weeks, the FDA will be reviewing the data. Now, a key date to look out for, mark your calendars, is December 10th, because that is when outside FDA advisors will be meeting and publicly vetting the clinical trial data for the vaccine. Now, you're probably wondering what happens if the FDA approves a vaccine, which hopefully they do. Well, once a vaccine is approved under emergency use authorization, it can be immediately distributed to state governments. However, it cannot be administered until a CDC advisory committee also reviews the data and then determines the criteria for who is eligible to receive it under emergency use authorization. And although it hasn't been publicly announced specifically when this advisory committee is meeting, it should be around the same time that the FDA will have their public meeting, so probably somewhere around December 10th. Now, what does that mean? Well, the actual criteria for who can get it under EUA doesn't actually exist. There's been plenty of news articles saying like, oh, it'll be for people at greater risk and for the elderly and for first responders, but that's just been like general assumptions. There hasn't actually been an official announcement of who will actually be eligible to receive these first vaccines under EUA. And that is what the CDC advisory committee will be doing. They will be officially determining the criteria and who is actually eligible. Now, according to Health Secretary Alex Azar, healthcare workers will be the first to receive the vaccine. Now, between Pfizer and Moderna, there should be about 40 million doses available by the end of December. But remember that it's 2 doses per person. So that'll actually be 20 million technically. And there's about like 20 million healthcare workers in the United States, so those are all going to go to those in the field. Now, this is a lot less than the 100 million doses that we were originally expecting through Operation Warp Speed. However, those contracts through Operation Warp Speed, including one that Pfizer has with the US government, those are still in effect. So they are still contracted to provide 100 million doses. And Pfizer specifically will receive $1.95 billion when they are able to provide those 100 million doses. And that comes out to, well, just a little bit under $20 per dose. But yeah, so in December, we'll see what happens with the vaccine, and hopefully the FDA approves it. And in other emergency use authorization news, the FDA has approved the antibody cocktail from Regeneron. Remember the one that was administered to Trump at the beginning of October? Yes, that one. This was just announced on Saturday night as well. So the FDA has granted emergency use authorization for the experimental antibody treatment that was administered to Trump shortly after he was diagnosed with the virus. And this gives doctors another option for treating patients with the virus. And if you're wondering exactly what this treatment is, it is a cocktail of two powerful antibodies that have shown promise in early studies at keeping the infection in check, reducing medical visits to patients who get the drug early in the course of their disease. And Eli Lilly actually made a similar treatment. Now, the drug is only really for people who are 12 and older and have tested positive for the virus and are at high risk for developing severe symptoms, but have not actually been hospitalized. And it's supposed to be administered early in the course of the disease, so hopefully within the first couple days, if that's possible. Now, this presents a little bit of a conundrum because since the antibody treatments are really not for people who have been hospitalized and are already sick and experiencing symptoms, and the drug has to be administered intravenously, how does that work? Because you're not going to be in a situation where you can receive the drug intravenously unless you're in a hospital or, well, in a clinic, as they mentioned in the article. Like, how do you figure out who those people are who have the virus but have not gotten symptoms yet, and then get them to a clinic soon enough so that they can receive this treatment? And the article notes, like, learning who those people are would require separate tests that are not routinely given to patients who test positive. And getting the treatment to the right people will require quick turnarounds in testing, as well as better coordination among the government and hospital officials. But hopefully that gets figured out. And in other big news from last week, the FAA has recertified Boeing's very controversial 737 MAX airplane. And it's been certified for real this time after a very long and arduous and very expensive modification process. And it should be, considering the plane crashes that happened in October of 2018 and March of 2019. Both of those planes were 737 MAX airplanes. But this time the FAA is very confident with the certification of these 737 MAX. In fact, FAA Administrator Steve Dickson is so confident that even he would put his own family on it and he would fly it himself. No, but seriously, the FAA required Boeing to make massive changes to the plane. They made Boeing do like a very complex reprogramming of the plane's computers and sensors, as well as a lot of rewiring. And this time the FAA used its own inspectors to inspect the plane, because previously Boeing employees have been inspecting the planes themselves. And this sounds a little outrageous, and it kind of is, but this is something that the FAA is allowed to do. They have the authority to give inspection powers to the employees of these plane manufacturers. But this time, the FAA really wanted to make sure that nothing was missed. Now, the news of this FAA approval came out on Wednesday, and Boeing stock did have a little bit of a run-up on Tuesday, as well as pre-market on Wednesday. But once the market opened, it had a bit of a sell-off. What is this? High of 226, and then very quickly went down to 215 at around 950. Yeah, so that's quite a sell-off. And last but not least, it has finally happened. Tesla will be added to the S&P 500. So they've been profitable for like 5 quarters in a row, and they will be added to the index on December 21st. This has been a long time coming for this company. I mean, 17 years, and they finally made it. And only a couple days after that announcement, Morgan Stanley increased their price target for Tesla from, $360 to $540. So it's been a big week for Tesla. If I remember correctly, the S&P announcement was after hours on Monday. Yeah, right here. Yeah, I was trading at like 408 and then had a big move all the way to, like 460. And then had a little bit of a sell-off at open. But then had a big upwards price movement on Wednesday with that Morgan Stanley news. Pre-market, it was 447. By around, 10:15, it was at 456, then 482 at a little bit after 12, and just kept going all the way to 494, then slipped a little bit, but yeah, so, and that's it for the news. As you can see, there's a lot that has happened, and there will be even more happening over the next few weeks, over the next couple months. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Bank Rob out.